Hello, and welcome back to the Indian Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Raj Balkaran, and you might be looking for some insight, some fun, a tale or two, maybe some wisdom bombs, and perhaps you are here for anything about dogs because you love dogs. Many of us love dogs. Some of us don't. There needs to be mentioned that when it comes to animals and how we relate to animals, much of that has to do with socialization and social conditioning and conceptualization. You know, what we're trained to believe, what we're told to believe, cultural ideas about such animals. That's not to say there isn't perhaps a universal dimension to relating to other beings. I mean, this, of course, is what the great ethical imperative of ahimsa is all about. Hey, I'm a being, you're a being, I have certain wants and needs, you might have similar wants and needs, like that. You know, there's something about empathy for other creatures. Having said that, certainly, people have not owned poodles for thousands of years. People have domesticated animals for thousands of years, but which people, at what period, and which animals, and to what level, right? It has to be understood that certain animals are friends and certain animals are food. And it really needs to be understood that this is all culturally derived. Yes, indeed. There's nothing objective about why chicken is dinner and parakeet's a pet and not vice versa. But I'm sure it's vice versa somewhere else. One happily eats cow in the West. One would scarcely think to eat horse. Certainly cows are generally not eaten in the Indic world. And there are those who eat beef in the Indic world, certainly. So there's a lot of social conditioning surrounding how we regard which animals, whether we befriend them, we eat them, or both, right? And so it is to be understood that while dogs, when we think of dogs, we live in a cultural context that has a relatively recent in the course of centuries and certainly millennia, very recent penchant for personifying canine friends, treating them as people, dressing them up, feeding them, walking them, sometimes pushing them around in strollers because, why not? Or what we do is we adopt these canine entities and we project our own ego desires onto them, whether it's to be cutesy wootsy and fun and loving, or whether it's to be a big old strong, potentially menacing pit bull, or maybe a cutesy wootsy pit bull. Who knows? But it has to be understood that this is all culturally derived based on how we're choosing to relate to these animals. Now, in the Indic context, certainly there are dogs who experience the same comforts as the dogs in Western culture, you can say. But also dogs in the Indic context, by and large, have their own world, their own packs, their own society. And they're not always, they might be treated more akin to raccoons, right, than other animals. And historically, this was certainly the case that a dog, a couple thousand years ago, right? The narratives that I'll be telling you are from the Mahabharata. If they would have been more wild than tame and sort of liabilities in terms of hygiene and ritual purity and perhaps even safety. We have to understand that we've domesticated canine species. But canine species obviously were once wild, and there are no shortage of wild canines to this day. Right. So as you talk about doggy dharma, we have to understand that dogs have different standings in different cultural contexts. And today I want to share a little bit of wisdom or content surrounding dogs as vahanas, as vehicles. Now, several Hindu deities have vahanas. They have animal vehicles. Think of them as one part, transport, one part totem animal, one part extension of self, right? So Vishnu, the great, glorious, grand Vishnu, the preserver who rules on high and takes incarnation age after age. What is an appropriate vahana for Vishnu? The eagle. Yes, America was not the first to adopt the eagle as its vahana. Okay, perhaps that says something about the skill and the vision of Vishnu, the ability to take care. The eagles have talons, etc. Durga, goddess of sovereignty and empowerment. What does she ride? A lion or a tiger. Makes sense. Ganesha's is the mouse. We've talked about this on previous podcasts. The vehicle will offer a key component of symbolism regarding what the deity's energy is. For example, the poised, powerful, regal Durga rides a lion, right? King of the jungle. Particularly, she rides the lion into battle. But in some cases, the vehicle doesn't represent the energy of the deity, but the energy to be transformed by the deity. The prime example of this is the rodent upon which Ganesha rides, because he is the great elephant-headed god. What could that possibly mean? Well, he's the Lord of wisdom, of grounding, of auspicious beginnings. He represents the part of self that the ancients call the buddhi, the intellect, the faculty to discern, right? Impulse control. What is the impulse that is being controlled? The rat race of the mind, the rodent he rides, right? In order to hear the soul signal or the voice of our inner wisdom, we must silence the chatter, the creaking of the wheel, of the tiny Ferris wheel upon which the rodent rides incessantly in our inner world, right? That's the mind proper, the manas, the receptacle of experiences, of memories, of patterns, of vasanas, the part of self with which we process sensation, impulse, habit, emotion, the manas. There's a brilliant distinction there between these two parts of self, the buddhi and the manas, that are personified in Ganesha astride a mouse, mushika. Is the mouse scurrying here and there with Ganesha atop him? No. It's the only time a mouse is not scurrying. Have you ever seen a mouse which does not scurry? Only when it's dead. Perhaps when it's eating, and even then nervously, flicking its gaze here and there just to make sure that it won't become someone else's food while trying to feed itself. Yet, Ganesha's vahana does not scurry. Right? A mouse or rodent consciousness is fear consciousness. It's full of fear for the sake of its survival. But the energy of Ganesha, or the intellect, is stillness, poise, access to higher cognitive functions. Okay. I want to turn to a form of Śiva we talked about a couple of podcasts ago, Bhairava, this wrathful form of Śiva created to destroy Brahma's ignorance. Śiva gets angry not necessarily certainly not because he wakes up that way. Shiva's anger is always a result of encountering ignorance. Now, this aspect of Śiva, Bhairava, he has a dog. His vehicle is the śvāna, the dog. Okay. The dog brings with it a wide range of connotations. Within the realm of Indian mythology, we have Sarma. She's the female dog from the Rig Veda, belonging to the pantheon of gods, along with Death's four-eyed dogs guarding the gates of hell. Right. This is we have corollaries in the European myth. What do we have? We have the three-headed dog guarding the gates of hell in Greco-Roman myth as well. For example, yes, the vehicle of Bhairava, this deity representing Shiva's divine wrath, teaches us about the energy of Bhairava. Due to associations created by our own modern Western conditioning, we may well see the dog as a faithful and loving companion to human beings. But let's try and think outside of the box of our conditioning and understand the essence of canine energy. Think about a time and space before the domestication of canines. Call to mind the wild natures of the fox and the wolf, the jackal, the coyote. Like Bhairava, these canine creatures are fierce and formidable, sleek, striking, and dangerous carnivores, skilled at the hunt. They may well lunge at their prey in an instant, aiming for the jugular. So canines, much like Bhairava, can be quite terrifying creatures. Yes, but that terror can be tamed, yes? Canines can be ferocious, but they also live and hunt with great intelligence. So by virtue of this intelligence, they can live and hunt in collaboration with purpose. Once again, the terror can be tamed. If you're able to form a bond with them, they're loyal and protective. The ferocity with which the canine hunts is the same ferocity with which it protects. Just as one might invoke Bhairava for protection, so too one might employ the service of a powerful, formidable dog, a guard dog. The dog can be domesticated, and so too can the wild energy of Shiva, even that of his wrath incarnate, Bhairava. Like the dog, spiritual power is wild and dangerous. Right? But with the correct training and guidance, particularly in the tantric context, particularly pertaining to Kundalini Shakti, yes, it can be hazardous, it can be dangerous, but with the correct training and guidance, it can be harnessed to power spiritual growth. Right? Beyond being powerful and fearsome, the dog in the Indic context has been regarded as polluting, marginal, liminal, eating scraps, sifting through garbage. One must realize that the vast majority of dogs in the Indic subcontinent do not live in human homes, but have a society of their own at the margins of human affairs. Just as the dog in this context brings with it associations of pollution and marginality, so too actually does Bhairava. In fact, in addition to being a mainstream Hindu deity, he is the presiding deity of the holy city Benares, Varanasi, Kashi, where countless Hindus cremate their dead and scatter their ashes in the Ganges. Bhairava represents a tantric transformation that takes elements of marginality, transgression, and pollution, and transmutes these elements for spiritual power, for spiritual growth. There's actually a famous story near the end of the great Sanskrit epic Mahabharata, where the royal hero Yudhiṣṭhira allows a dog to accompany him to the gates of heaven. He's, at this point, he's bereft of all of his other companions, his family, in fact, his brothers. This dog brings him some solace, you can say. The gods object, heaven has a sign, no dogs allowed, apparently. The gods object to so polluting, an animal to desecrate the divine realms with its presence. So, access denied, they deny the dog entry into heaven. Well, Yudhiṣṭhira was taken by the loyalty of the dog. Here you see an element of innate affection, compassion, empathy, really trumping social discourse, social condition, right? Yudhiṣṭhira is taken by the loyalty of the dog, and he returns the loyalty. He declares to the gods of heaven that he will not leave the dog behind. And if the dog can't enter heaven, then heaven's no place he wants to be. As it turns out, the dog is actually Yudhiṣṭhira's father, Dharma, the god of virtue in disguise, virtue and vice. They're often culturally defined, but when we pay attention to how we feel, pay attention to our heart, virtue and vice are not so elusive as we might like to think. It was Dharma, virtue, testing Yudhiṣṭhira in the guise of this dog. Here we see the dual aspect of the canine spirit, the purest of hearts and even the most unclean of bodies, as the case of this dog. Just as canines have both wild and tame personas, so there are two versions of dog pose for those of you interested in the asana. Upwards facing dog has to do with working with the wild canine energy. This is a healing pose that activates the upward flow of Kundalini. The head is above the heart, extending to the heavens. Downward dog, on the other hand, is a cooling pose. It offers the grounding presence and companionship of a domesticated dog. Śiva is sometimes called Pashupati, Lord of Beasts, because his refined consciousness is said to be able to effortlessly tame wild beasts. In downward dog, the head is below the heart, grounding into the earth. Hands and feet are firmly planted on the floor. In this pose, we allow our wild energies to be calmed, like a tame and loving dog. In these two poses, we see the range of expression we can find in canine creatures. By understanding the mythology of Bhairava, we understand the transformative power of that energy in the life of the yogi or the aspirant or the seeker. Hope you've enjoyed this content as much as its teller has enjoyed sharing it with you. Feel free to reach out if I can be of service. If you have requests, suggestions for future podcasts, and perhaps come study with me at the online school, IndianWisdomSchool.com. Or get in touch if you could use direction in your education in some way. Okay? Take good care of yourself. Until next time, namaste.